like to talk, pick your brain a little bit about the role of institutions in the entrepreneurial ecosystem. You've given scholarships for young people to drop out of school and pursue innovative ideas. But at the same time, many universities in the country, including Duke, are trying to change the way that they do business so that we can do a better job of transitioning the innovations that grow at the university out to the marketplace. What do universities need to do a better job of that? Or is it even possible for the modern university to do that?
Well, I don't have answers for all these every problem in the world or anything like that. I do think there's something very odd about the translation function where there's a lot of research that's going on, but it translates surprisingly little over into the tech business side, and maybe it's possible that the research is too theoretical, too esoteric, and that maybe the business side is too short-term oriented, and that people are looking for things that are certain to work or that have too short a time horizon. But somehow these things have become really decoupled. I always think one of the important questions is what is sort of the goal of one's education? How does one hope to translate it into different areas? I was speaking at University of Illinois a few months ago, and it was sort of the engineering school dean I was talking. It was sort of about how they were doing all these different STEM areas they were training people in, and has 7,000 students studying engineering at U of I. So I asked, well, how many people are studying computer science? It was 2,800. At that point, you're supposed to always say, oh, that's a lot. If you say the opposite of what you're supposed to say, you normally get some interesting territory. So I said, so what's everybody else doing? And then the more diplomatic way of saying that was, so what are the areas outside of computer science where the demand just massively outstrips supply, where people are able to get really well-paying jobs, to apply their engineering or science discipline outside the university. And there's sort of this uncomfortable silence, and there was, well, I suppose petroleum engineering is the one other one that's pretty good. And then it was, how big is that department? Oh, we shut that department down about a decade ago. and so I do think, there's sort of one of the big acronyms we have right now is the STEM acronym, and I am very much in favor of more scientific, technological, engineering breakthroughs, and yet there is a question how well it works as a career for many of the people in it, and so and how well it certainly does not automatically translate into these fields. If you study like physics, like a really hard field, it's super hard to make a living in physics in any of the applications. And so I think this translation function is worth thinking through a lot more. The obnoxious formula I had on it is that I think the humanities people are maybe better off than the STEM people, because in the humanities, at least you know there are going to be no jobs, and so you know that you have to scramble from day one. Whereas in the STEM fields, you've been told that this is something where there's a tremendous shortage and there's a tremendous need for people, and so people may end up being much more complacent. And so I think my answers always come down to, though, I think there's no formula, there's no single thing that fixes it, and what I'd like to see people doing a lot more is thinking for themselves. If I had to do it again, I probably would still go to Stanford. I might still go to Stanford Law School, but I'd want to ask a lot more questions. Why was I doing it? Was I doing it just for prestige, just because I thought it was an automatic way for the future, rather than for substantive reasons? And so it's, I think it's always worth asking these questions a lot more than people are asking them.
You famously said that we wanted flying cars, and we got 140 characters. All of my entrepreneurial adventures have been in medicinal chemistry and in pharma, and boy, that is true in spades there, right? I've built a glaucoma company. There hasn't been a new class of drugs come to market for the treatment of glaucoma in 30 years. It's virtually the same in antibiotics. The NIH budget last year was $29 billion, way more than was invested by VC in early stage kinds of things. What could the federal government do to get more bang for its buck for that $29 billion, or should it just get out of the business altogether?
Well, again, you know, I certainly believe that we could be doing a lot more in the biotech space generally, and certainly there are many of these things where, you know, you'd much rather have a cure for Alzheimer's than have, say, an IT solution that tells you have a high probability of getting Alzheimer's. I mean, maybe there's some value in the second, but I do actually think that there's a lot to be said for getting these biotech things to work better. Certainly one challenge is a regulatory one. You know, it costs maybe $100,000 to get a software company started. You know, I'm not sure the number's quite this high, but you know, it's commonly said it's on the order of $1 billion to get something through the FDA. And we have sort of a lot of, and there are, you know, it's obviously you want these drugs to be safe. You have to have some thresholds, but there is a question whether things are too high, and to give. And so, for example, one of the things that you could never get through the FDA is a drug that works slightly less well than an existing one, but that may be a lot cheaper. Right. Even though, you know, in the computer field, you've often had, you know, lower quality computers that were much cheaper, and then that became the basis over time for progress in other dimensions. And so if you say that the only things that you can approve are things that are sort of somehow qualitatively better than anything that exists, that puts you on a certain development trajectory. If we had that in the computer field, you know, we'd be nothing but we'd have nothing but Cray supercomputers probably, or something like that, and that would be sort of a very strangely distorted industry. You know, my guess on the government funding side that's very, and I'll just describe the problem. I don't really have a solution to it, but I think the problem is that science has become incredibly specialized, and so it's very hard for people to know what scientists to fund, what area to fund. I would not feel qualified to fund people doing research in quantum computing or string theory and physics, or glaucoma research, but then because none of us have the expertise to do it, it always ends up simply defaulting to the people in those fields, and then there's a very big risk that the grant writing becomes super political, where the string theorists get to decide which string theorists get the money. You have this sort of super politicized grant writing process, and I worry that there's sort of a bit of a Gresham's law at work, where the people who are nimble in the art of writing government grants may be over time displacing the people who are really good scientists. In Platonic political theory, it was always the philosopher could never be a king, because the philosopher was interested in the truth. A king had a attenuated relationship to the truth. And in a similar way, I wonder whether a scientist can ever be a good politician. Because a scientist is interested in the truth. A politician has a very shaky relationship with the truth. And when you sort of make the science funding process political, right, this is a sort of very deep problem you run into. And if it wasn't specialized, you could have sort of some generalized review process, but I think it's the specialization of science that has in practice made it extremely political. Whenever I mention this to people, they always sort of agree with this is a problem, but I think it's sort of a very deep problem, and it's one we do well to think about a lot more.
All right, and how you solve it's not straightforward. You're also famously anti-elitist, right? And yet you work in an industry that is massively dominated by a very small number of schools. Some might say 2. Is there a groupthink problem that inhibits innovation?
There's always a question in Silicon Valley whether it's, there certainly are advantages to being located in Silicon Valley, because you have these network effects. There are all these other people who if you're doing something, you have a pretty good sense of what the state of the art is, and so there are sort of all these informational advantages one gets, but there's also certainly a bubble. There's something about it that's very prone to the formation of bubbles, or sort of ape-like, sheep-like, lemming-like, herd-like behavior, and that happens to sort of a very disturbing degree. And so I think these sort of super networked industries are never unambiguously good. Just like people at business school may be doing too much networking, and then at the end of the networking exercise, they conclude to all do the exact wrong thing. There's a risk that the hyper-networked Silicon Valley, even though it feels like you have this incredible information flow, you're really just being drenched with what's trendy or fashionable, and not really thinking hard about some other possibilities. So I do think at this point one could start a successful tech business in many places outside of Silicon Valley. I don't necessarily, I think Stanford sort of has this history. I don't think there's anything automatic about it. There probably are, probably a lot of people going to Stanford who want to start tech companies. There's probably a tendency for them to do things that are, super conventional for the most part. So both pluses and minuses with it, and it's important to think this through.
We've had a number of questions from students that have been either emailed or tweeted, and I'll try a couple of those. And then we have a microphone if folks from the audience would like to line up. We'll give you an opportunity to ask Peter some questions as well. So here, student questions. With the move of Dave Marcus and Facebook's subsequent announcement to introduce money transfer over chat, how do you see the foreseeable future in this space? How soon do you think a competitor emerges to challenge PayPal?
See, I have to always be careful what I say about Facebook since I'm still on the board there, so I have to be a little bit careful what I say. But there's definitely room for quite a bit of innovation. Let me say something a little bit more general. So on the payment side, as in many other technologies, to sort of break through, you need to do something that's dramatically better than anything that currently exists. So, the sort of the rule of thumb I give is you want something that's like 10 times as good on some dimensions. PayPal originally replaced checks. It was like over 10 times as fast. You got the money instantly rather than in 7 to 10 days. And if you have something that's just a little bit better than an existing solution, it tends to be very hard to get people to move. And one of the things that's true of many technologies, I think payments maybe is a very severe version of this, is we can envision things that are slightly better for a lot of people, but they're incredibly hard to roll out. And so there's a way in which, it's not only that the perfect is the enemy of the very good, as we're always told, but it's also the case that in tech, the very good is the enemy of the perfect. If you have things that are very good, it's incredibly hard to get to something that's perfect. And you're often best innovating in areas where things are very bad. If you go from very bad, you can go to very good or perfect. And that's sort of the challenge in all these areas. And so I'm somewhat skeptical of these broad platform approaches. I'm skeptical of Apple Pay or anything that's going to take things that are working pretty well and make them perfect. And I think you're always much better off finding some very specific point-like solution and going after that. PayPal with online micro merchants, Stripe is an emerging payment company that did it by finding much better ways to integrate with developers and websites, and so they sort of got a developer network built out, and that was sort of the core advantage they built to. But I think it's always some very narrow focus that gives the advantage, rather than a story about how you're 1% better and will take over the whole world.
Another student question. Storytelling is vitally important to a company, especially for sales. What channels for telling stories do you think have been ignored or overlooked in business?
Well, I'm not sure that many have been overlooked. I mean, we certainly do live in a world that's drenched with advertising and all these things. I would say that the more common mistake businesses make is to think that they should go after a whole set of different channels. And in practice, I think you just need to find one channel that really works. And if you get one channel to really work, then you would be able to succeed. And they're very different channels for different kinds of businesses. If you're selling to consumers at large, it's normally some advertising channel. If you're selling to businesses where it's a much higher price point, it's often a sales channel. Occasionally there's sort of more general marketing or things like that. But in practice, I think you just need to get one channel to really work. But this is always, it's always technology and the distribution of technology. It's always this combination that's absolutely essential to get these businesses to work. Generally, if you have businesses that are dominated, the pro-sales side I would make is that even though we live in a society where sales is dominant, in a Silicon Valley context, it is often somewhat underweighted, and engineers or scientists often have this bias where if you build something, it will automatically sell itself. This is it's actually one of the big challenges in science-oriented companies I found, is that the scientists are almost delusional about how automatically the world will accept their discoveries. And there's this conveying the information function that's very important.
Questions from the audience? Anybody want to stand up and take a crack? If you just line up at the microphone here, we'll get through as many as we can.
Hi there. Thank you so much, Peter, for being with us today and sharing some time. I'm Rebecca with the MBA program here. So I lived in Syria for a year to learn Arabic, so that's my differentiator maybe. Anyway, in your book 0 to 1, you talk about a startup being the largest group of people that you can convince to build something new. And you even compare the founding fathers to, as their own sort of a startup. So in today's age, especially in the US, where you have these huge institutions like the federal government that's in charge of funding a lot of innovation-focused research, what are your thoughts on the potential and opportunities related to innovating in government and innovating in citizenship, whether that be tools for holding the government accountable or communicating, or, do you think that there's an opportunity there? What do you think is the opportunity when you have these larger entrenched institutions controlling a lot of resources? What are your thoughts on the interaction that could potentially be most productive in increasing the rate of innovation at at the atoms level?
Well, a lot of different questions there. My own view is that there's a need for tremendous innovation in government. I have no idea how to do it. If I did, I'd be in politics, or I'd be doing something in those areas. I think one of the reasons Silicon Valley is so charismatic at this point is that you can actually do something in a startup. You can actually solve certain types of problems and move the world in a certain direction. Whereas if you go to Washington, D.C., there is a sense that this has been catastrophic for people's careers for the last 30 years. If you look at the people, even very senior people in the last few administrations, it was generally a bad idea for their resume, and it's because they got so little done. And this has been in an era when, even though government's been growing, it somehow, even as the amount of money spent has gone up, less and less has been done. And so yeah, I do always think it's an important area for us to try to fix, but I often think it's best to focus on things where we can change things and not focus so much on the ones we can't. Probably the places that are the most promising within government are I think there's a lot more happening on a city level, on some local levels, where it's much easier to solve some of these coordination problems. Now, in theory, there are a number of problems that could only work on a federal or maybe even an international scale. But I worry that the institutions are so sclerotic that it's very hard to see how they will get fixed.
Thank you.
Hi, Peter. My name is Stephanie, and I'm very interested in product design, and I'll actually be doing that at Facebook this summer. And one of their more interesting acquisitions recently was Tian & Lax, which is a design agency, and it's been kind of a trend lately that a lot of these bigger companies have been buying up this design talent and looking for design talent, and that's even reflected in salaries. Like, there's this changing emphasis on design in technology, like the balance of design and engineering. And so I guess I was wondering if you could speak to that a little bit and what your thoughts are on the relevance of design and how that's changing as technology gets more mature.
Well, it's there are certainly one of the critical ways to differentiate a lot of these products is that they are products people actually would want to use, and so it's not just whether it works in some theoretical engineering perspective, but also whether, especially for consumer products, the user interface, all these kinds of things, really work in a very powerful way. It's always, I think there's several different kinds of things that go under the word design. It has sort of a fuzzy connotation. It's a little bit hard to measure what's good design, what's bad design. It's hard to quantify. But I do think one definition of design that I would give, which is a little bit different from just the sort of aesthetic look and feel of a website, would be design in the sense of putting a lot of different pieces together and the sort of complex coordination that you need. And I think a modality of innovation that's been very underexplored is complex coordination. If you look at Steve Jobs and what he did with the iPhone, if you ask what was the innovation, it was not on any single component. All the components already existed, but it was in sort of the complex coordination of putting them all together in just the right way, and then that included building the whole massive supply chain with Foxconn in China, and it's the sort of design of the business itself that represents a modality of innovation that we're not very used to. We're much too focused on iterative innovation, all the sort of incremental improvement where you do something, you sort of continuously improve it. That's something we're very optimized for, something where you rebuild things from scratch by combining all sorts of existing elements in a totally new way, generally not done. I think this is also what my colleague Elon did with the Tesla company, where again, you say, what were the breakthroughs in the Tesla? It didn't really involve any single component, but it was really the integration of all these different pieces together. And because so few people are doing that when you have complex coordination, you can actually do something and get a pretty big advantage that other people will not catch up with for a long time, because it's a sort of a modality of innovation we do not even recognize.
Thank you.
Hi, Peter. My name is Brian. I recently read that you're interested in the field of longevity and life extension, and that you've made a number of investments in this field. I am wondering whether you could share some of your thoughts on where this space is going in the upcoming decades.
Well, this is, it's certainly all these questions about anti-aging research. There's sort of a lot of it has a basic research component where it's not clear it translates into for-profit businesses, but I think it's an area that's it's actually quite big, but extremely underexplored as a general field. I think I think psychologically, a lot of the ways that we deal with death and mortality is through some strange combination of acceptance and denial. The acceptance is we're all going to die. There's nothing we can do about it. The denial is not going to die anytime soon, so I'm not going to think about it. It's sort of, you can think of acceptance and denial as sort of extreme pessimism and extreme optimism. And I always think those are very unhealthy attitudes at the extremes. I think they actually sort of converge. When you're extremely pessimistic, there's nothing you can do. Extremely optimistic, there's no need to do anything, and they sort of sum up to doing nothing in both cases. And what I think would be a healthier attitude for us to have is somewhere intermediate, where it's neither acceptance nor denial, but we're more focused on fighting it and asking just questions. Why do people get older? What causes aging? What drives the phenomenon? It's linked to almost every disease in the world. So you have a 1 in 1,000 chance of getting cancer in your 30th year. When you're 30 years old, in your next year, you have a 1 in 1,000 chance of getting cancer. At age 80, you have a 1 in 10 chance of getting cancer in the next year of your life. And so when almost all these diseases are linked to aging, should we perhaps be studying the phenomenon of aging more generally? And I'm convinced it's an extremely underexplored area that is very promising to look at.
Thank you.
Good evening. So we have a room full of aspiring entrepreneurs, but statistically, maybe a handful will go on to achieve the impact that they're looking to have in the world. So what would you say are the things that differentiates those individuals, or maybe what would you look for in order to identify them?
Let's see. This is, I don't think it's. Well, first of all, let me. A couple things I would say here. I don't think that there's a. When I look at companies, the on the talent side, I'm always nervous about people wanting to become entrepreneurs. I don't think that's always sort of a problematic aspiration. And one of my friends I was talking to a few years ago was like, what do you want to be doing in 10 years? It's very clear I'm going to be an entrepreneur. And that's sort of like saying I'm going to be rich, I'm going to be famous. It's like nobody in their right mind would want to be an entrepreneur for the sake of being an entrepreneur. It's not even clear that you want to start a company normally. You start a company like as a last resort because it's the only way you can get something new done. And you can't get things done in any existing institutions, whether they're large, government institutions, large corporate institutions, and you start companies because you have some sort of very important problem you're trying to solve, and not for its own sake. And so I always like asking the prehistory question when I talk to people. What brought you together? Why is this team working on this problem? A bad answer to the prehistory question is we met at an entrepreneur networking event a week ago, and that's like saying I'm going to get married to the first person to meet at the slot machine in Las Vegas. And you might hit the jackpot, but really bad idea. And then I think sort of the much better answer is one where there's been some deliberation, some planning. One of us is on the business side, one's on the tech side, and we're gonna do this. I never quite know how to think about the statistics, probabilities question. I think there's sort of a version of this where it's always, well, is this just like a matter of luck, where it's just some people hit the lottery and other people don't? And I always am very resistant to this sort of conception. I sort of think that luck is just sort of like this atheistic word for God, and it's like a bit of an excuse we use. And I've found that when, as a venture capitalist, when you're investing in these startups, one of the temptations you always have that's really dangerous is to say, well, I don't really know what's going to work here, and so I'm going to just give everybody a little bit of money and I'll sort of see what happens. And as soon as you think that you're buying lottery tickets, you've somehow already psyched yourself into losing a lot of money, and it always goes very, very badly wrong. So I think this question of luck, luck can be sort of ambiguous. It could, on the one hand, be a statement about the nature of the universe, where it's just a matter, it's deeply probabilistic and uncertain and indeterminate. But I think in practice, whenever I've ascribed things to luck, I normally think it's a statement of my personal laziness, where I don't really want to think about things hard enough and try to figure them out. And so I'm always inclined to think this through a lot more. And then I think that the application on this that I always encourage people to do is not to think about your future in probabilistic or statistical terms. It's not like some random walk where you're getting a degree from Duke and then you'll get a job at a consulting firm because you won't know what to do, and then you're going to find opportunities 3 years from there in a big company, and then that'll lead to other opportunities down the line. You shouldn't think of your career as just building up this sort of indeterminate resume that's going to be where every job just generates options for future jobs. I think there is something to be said for thinking of it in somewhat non-statistical terms, where this is what I'm really good at, passionate about, and that nobody's working on. I think those are the three things I do. What you're good at, what you like doing, and what somehow is very, very uncrowded, and then try to come up with a plan.
All right, thank you.
Hi, I'm Travis Wolf. I'm an undergrad. And my question deals with your opening remarks when you said that courage is in shorter supply than genius. Do you think this is a trend that's always existed, or is it being exacerbated by, the technology that we're grown accustomed to, where we see pretty much what everyone's doing at all times on Facebook or Twitter? And do you think that there's anything we can really do to change it?
Let's say I don't know if I have a good enough historical sense about. I think it's always been in pretty short supply. It certainly is a worry with some of these new media that they somehow give people feedback that's too fast, and so we have a lot of very fast anti-theories that get formed, where people very quickly get told that's a little bit too strange, that doesn't quite work, and And sometimes I do think you get to interesting ideas or interesting businesses when you stay for a while on a really bad idea and that you're passionate about and that you explore, and then there's actually something there that you indirectly get at. You know, PayPal, we initially started with beaming money on Palm Pilots. And it was voted as one of the 10 worst business ideas of 1999, which was a year that had many bad business ideas in Silicon Valley by some magazine. But we're sort of very interested in crypto and currencies, and then this got us to thinking about, you know, what had worked. We studied all these other systems, and then we gradually stumbled into the idea of linking money and email. So I think if you're discouraged too quickly, you'll end up defaulting too much to what other people are doing. So, you know, feedback is almost always a good thing, but there's a way it can very powerfully reinforce the convention. So I'm not sure it's more acute now than it has been in the past. It's something I do worry about a lot.
Okay, thank you.
We have time for just one more question.
Hi, Peter. I'm Safana Humaira. I'm an undergrad. So I have two questions. They're both short, sorry. They're really short. So the first one is about the insights you gained from the Thiel Fellowship, specifically the 20 and 20 program. So what were maybe some disappointments that you saw from the program versus the places where expectations were met and where expectations were exceeded? And the second question I have is your comments that you made about social entrepreneurship. You seemed a little skeptic about it. You said, like, all social enterprises tend to be the 10th solar film company. So my question is, for a field that has such defined needs and like such defined unmet needs, and with so many people who truly care about what they want to do in the social entrepreneurship sector, why don't we see disruptions?
Let's see. Well, let me briefly answer both. I think the Thiel Fellowship program, you know, we've sort of gained more. I don't want to sort of make a big advertisement for it here, but you know, we've sort of steadily gained traction over the last 5 years. We're up to 2,800 applicants for 20 slots in the 5th class from about 400 in year one when we started it in 2011. I think it has been an overwhelmingly positive experience for most of the people involved. The initial criticism we got was that this was a crazy, evil thing to take people out of college. The criticism we now get is that the program is elitist because it doesn't go to it only works for a small number of people. So I'm much happier with the second critique than the first one where you're screwing up people's lives. So I think that's sort of the, you know, there's a lot more detail I can give. There are definitely some things we want to do better and improve, but I think it's generally been a big success. You know, I have been a bit of a critic of social entrepreneurship, but let me, you know, a lot of it comes down to the meaning of the word social, which I think is an ambiguous word, because I think social can mean either, number one, it can mean good for society, or it can mean, number two, good as seen by society. And I think every great company has a transcendent sense of mission. You know, a great company is not just about making money. It is, we're working on a problem that nobody else in the world is working on. When Elon started SpaceX, the goal is to send people to Mars, and it's because, and Elon believes this is one of the most important problems in the world to solve. It deals with all sorts of existential risks on this planet. Now, SpaceX would not be considered a form of social entrepreneurship, even though they have a unique mission that has, that Elon would argue has incredibly important social repercussions. And I think the problem is that, so I like mission-oriented companies where there's a counterfactual sense of mission, where it's like, if we're not working on this problem doesn't get solved. That's really motivational. When it becomes social in the second meaning of the word, it becomes sort of dangerously conventional, where you have too many people doing the same thing. And they're sort of, you know, there's sort of like micro-lending. There's sort of all these different forms of social entrepreneurship that, where it has the feel of being the nth company in a given category, and N tends to be pretty large because it becomes so conventional. One of the contrarian question I always ask on the nonprofit side when I get hit up for making donations to nonprofit causes, you know, the contrarian business question is, what great business is nobody starting? The intellectual one is, tell me something true that nobody agrees with you on. The investor one is, you know, why are all the other investors missing this investment? So it's always, you always want to ask that. That's the contrarian investor question. The contrarian nonprofit question is, what unpopular causes is nobody funding? And so I always ask, it's always the simple, the easiest way I have of deflecting is, explain to me why your cause is deeply unpopular. Because if it's popular, I assume it's getting funded relatively well relative to the really worthwhile and unpopular causes that I want to try to go about finding funding for. So I'm very much in favor of those. At the margins, I don't want to be the 10th company doing something that's a popular cause.
Thank you so much.
All right, Peter will be available out in the lobby for a book signing. So thank you very much, Peter.